Really?
So a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. As always, thank you all for attending. Please eat as much of this food as possible. This is thanks to Rubric, so thank you for Rubric for supplying the pizza this evening.
Representatives from Rubric?
They're not, but we're filming this, so they're going to see this afterwards.
Oh.
And I took pictures and tweeted it. We were actually supposed to have a representative here, but they're doing their Q4 release right now, and he is like completely flat out. So.
And just what does the company do or person do?
Sorry?
What does the person who sponsors the food or what do you do?
It's a company, the company Rubric. The salesperson would love to talk to you about it, but he's not here right now. So,
so they are competition or?
Yeah, no. It's just it's a company that does. They have a appliance that does stuff on AWS. They're in the BCDR space. I'll talk to you about it later. We'll get you in touch with the sales guy. We'll get the commercial for you. So a couple of housekeeping notes. This is the November meeting. Next month, we're going to do an AWS reInvent recap. I'm going to be heading out there for the reInvent this year. This will be my first time. I will take furious and copious notes. Is anybody else going to be going? Anybody else attending? Okay, awesome. All right, we'll hang out together. And so we're going to be doing a recap of reInvent, and we're also going to be doing a.
Someone's going to come and cover serverless. Someone that just attended the serverless conference. Someone from Liberty Mutual was there, and we'll have a presentation on it.
Very cool. So I'll be very short, and he can stretch out and do the rest of it. I'll just be. Here's the highlights. I'll just hit play on Andy Jassie's keynote, and just walk off the stage. So tonight, everybody here knows what DevOps is, and you know what all of it, what it means. Well, maybe that's not entirely true. For every person I've talked to, it seems like DevOps has a different definition. So this evening we're going to have an alumnus well, not alumnus. You've been there for how many years now?
About 6.5 years.
6.5 years
Yeah.
at AWS. So you've got the battle scars to prove it, and
yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, let me welcome to the stage.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks all for coming. I know it's a chilly Tuesday evening, and sometimes it's tough. You're to manage. Do I go home and have a beer and chillax, or do I go and see some nerd talk about DevOps? So I'm glad you all came. My name is Matt Trescot. I'm manager of Solutions Architecture. I do work out of our Cambridge office in Boston. I've been with Amazon about 6.5 years, both in support roles, solution architecture roles, and more recently management roles. I recently relocated from the Bay Area, where I've been there for about 5.5 years, and then in Seattle for a few. But I am originally from Maine. I grew up in the Damascotta area of Maine, and so I'm just really happy to be back here. And it's fun to do these meetups as well in this area, so it's great to get reintroduced. So sweet. So yeah, we're going to talk about DevOps. We're going to talk a little bit about the DevOps culture. Again, what does DevOps mean? And what you'll find out is it does mean different things to different people. And I think that's one of the interesting things about DevOps. And I think culturally, it has a lot of implications, right? So what does it mean to adopt DevOps? What does it mean for your organization? How might you go about adopting it inside of you, inside of your organization, inside of your company, as well as some of the trends that we see and some of the different things that I've seen not only at AWS and Amazon, but also just working with different companies moving onto the cloud, in a variety of places. So you guys all probably know this. Software moves pretty quickly today. Long gone are the days of you perusing the aisle of the Best Buy software aisle looking for the latest software releases. We get it much faster, and people expect it to be fast, right? So you click on an app in the App Store, you download an app from wherever on your PC. For those of you that use Linux, you just do a yum install or an apt-get, and you can get software super quick, right? And so as part of the speed of not only delivering software, but the speed of producing features, the speed of fixing bugs on your software, the speed of even creating new software products, all moves very, very quickly. And it's important that when you're in your software release cycle, that you have a process that helps you get that software out the door as fast as possible. And so that's something that's super important, and I think that, you know, we all know today that if you wait 6 months, you know, to get that bug fixed or get that feature request, there's a potential not only that your customers aren't going to be happy, but somebody else may beat you to the punch, right? I know that we've seen that. It happens out there from day to day. So one of the main points of DevOps is to really help your teams get the software out in front of your customers as fast as possible. Also, just feel free to ask questions. I think this is a pretty small group. I don't want to wait till like the end. I think that's super weird. So if you have a question, like something comes up, please just raise your hand. You know, I'm not shy, so just let me know. So again, let's just go a little bit deeper. Maybe what is DevOps? You know, what are some of the things that you know, make DevOps out there? And again, everybody has a little bit of a different definition of this. So this is kind of, you know, our definition of what we see that's out there in the industry. Right, so really it's a cultural philosophy. I think this is actually one of the most interesting ones. You know, culturally it can be a big change for organizations. Who controls what is often a pretty contentious conversation inside of a lot of companies. You know, traditionally, you know, developers control the code, the IT and operations team control all the servers and the equipment, and there's a distinct line, right? And, you know, the software guys would kind of put something together. They had a few little boxes to try stuff out on, but when you wanted to get it out into production, they kind of toss it over the invisible fence, and then the operations team would kind of run with it. And DevOps culturally is very much blurring that line. So it is very different than what you would often see you know, companies doing in the past as far as how they got software out the door. You know, what we tend to see is the software teams that are building the software have a little bit more, or oftentimes a lot more control over the infrastructure that they're putting that software on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You know, practices, so some of the core practices that you might look at. And then of course some tools, definitely some tools. We'll go through the suite of tools that we have that are DevOps focused on AWS and talk about them a little bit. Sweet, so DevOps and Ops coming together. I think culturally, like, this is often the one that's super tough to do. You know, again, like I've seen a lot of companies that there's been a little bit of a line there. But I think what's changing these days is a couple of things. One is the ability to treat infrastructure as code, right? The ability to sort of spin up and have infrastructure come and go. You know, less sort of physical boxes that you go and touch. Has anyone ever heard the cattle, not pets before? So just a couple people, right? So for those of you that had servers, and I had them in a rack and, you know, in a data center in Marlboro when I actually physically racked servers, and I wanted them to stick around, right? Like my pets, and I liked them a lot. And they would, you know, and they would hang out, and it made it very tough to give somebody one, or to get a new one real quick. Like we had to do a PO, and that was often very challenging, and, you know, someone had to sign off on it. And now, I don't know if the cattle is generally the best metaphor for it, but the idea is that you can essentially, they can come and go. It's like a herd of cattle. You know, some you might spin off, you may lose a couple, but in general, you can get the cattle that you need to do the job, and it's a very different paradigm than it used to be when we had to actually physically have servers.
Maybe potatoes or corn.
Potatoes or corn might be better. Yeah, you know, it's, I guess when you get, I don't know who thought it up, but when you get down to it, yeah, I mean, essentially, some cows are dying.
Not a vegetarian.
Years ago, there was a small startup in your chief, right, Werner Vogel.
Oh, Werner Vogel's, yeah.
He said that he liked that start. They were in the startup for Lambda, and he said he really liked the way the startup said. He said servers are cattle. You should not name them as pedo or whatever.
Sure.
Because the moment you have named them, you have emotional, and then you can't slaughter them and make them, you know.
Sure. So very good. So if you didn't hear, right, the idea is right, you don't want to name your servers. Because once you name them like your pets, you get attached to them. And that's not something you want to do. And in general, that's a good philosophy for the cloud, AWS, you know, other providers is, you know, if the more you can treat your underlying compute as ephemeral, and that it may go away at any time, you know, you can often overcome some challenges in that you don't care about an individual server because you can get one right away if one goes away, which is kind of great. And so, no more silos, so sort of understanding dev and ops coming together. A couple of interesting things that I've seen change-wise from dev and ops. Not only is infrastructure as code out there, but one of the challenges that we also see is developers want to write in different languages, right? So it's not just everything's a PHP app or a Java app. And the ops guys, if they have to troubleshoot it, they can just go in and say, oh, all right, Java ran out of memory, I'll just bounce it, we're good to go. Now we're also seeing, Scala and Erlang and Go and all these different frameworks for writing software, and it becomes more and more difficult for your operations team to support all these different languages, especially if they go bad in the middle of the night. And so one of the interesting changes that I've seen is one of the unusual things that happens in the DevOps transformation is that the software developers over time tend to own more and more of the tier 1 front-end support, so they tend to be the first person on call. If the app goes bad, they actually tend to page the dev team in. The dev team may go on, try to fix it, and if they can't, then they'll page in operations. We actually do this at Amazon. I've seen it done at a number of companies. It's definitely a philosophy change, but it's one where the app developers feel like they have skin in the game and they actually own the app as it goes out.
So to somebody that's been in the industry, that seems counterintuitive. Is that more effective? Do you see that being more effective in the way that AWS is implementing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's worked for us. And most of the companies that I've talked to have generally said that it's been more effective for a number of reasons. One, they generally understand the code better than the operations guys can.
Sure.
It also lets them write any code they want, right? So the ops team are there to provide them with compute and scalability and load balancers and DNS and all the stuff to get their app out the door, but they don't really care what they put on that infrastructure. And so to make that happen so that the dev teams can actually iterate and get their software out the door faster, in general it just doesn't work to ask the operations team to support it any longer, right? You need to have the software developer supporting it on tier 1. No, I'm assuming the guy with the pager isn't really that happy about it.
Right.
But in general, it does work from a supporting the software standpoint.
But as you mentioned, having developers having skin in the game is a big thing, right?
Yep.
That you don't just put in crap and ship it off in its infrastructure's
Well, right. I mean, I think everyone's seen like the kid with the flaming house behind her, and it says, it worked in development,
yeah.
right? And so because production's on fire, and I think that it does also, if you're writing this code and it's going into production, I would think that most people would write it well, but potentially you have a little bit more incentive to say, well, I'm going to be the guy with the pager, so it makes sense for me to want to go more than write awesome code. So shared responsibility, right? So we see this. Developers owning the code, maybe owning some of the initial support. Operations are there to make a scalable infrastructure for them. They're also there to sort of have some bumpers and boundaries, to provide security, to provide testing, to provide that infrastructure to them in an easy, digestible fashion, right? So they make it easy for them to get the infrastructure when they need it, so they have to make these tools available. And we have another slide, we talked a little bit about it. Again, there's some other things you have to make available when the developers are going to be that front line of support, right? They need monitoring, they need a lot of other tools so they can actually look at statistics and look at different things while they're troubleshooting. Ownership, of course, always important. And then, of course, visibility and communication, which is definitely a little bit easier now, right? So, we all have Slack and HipChat and a bunch of other software out there for us to collaborate. It's a lot easier. I remember using to do it on IRC. Wasn't always the easiest way. Like, not everyone wanted to join IRC. Very little GIF support, or GIF, depending on which camp you fall into, but that's always helpful for bridging the gap of funny GIF meetings, right? So visibility and communication are also key. One of the other things that we see that it helps is it helps going from this monolithic one giant application to a service-oriented architecture with more and more little applications. We're seeing this trend quite often. I'll talk a little bit more about it from the Amazon standpoint. But really what it does is smaller teams who can create a feature or a product that generally publishes an API, even internally for other teams to ingest, makes it so that you can iterate on your business a little bit quicker. We have this concept at Amazon called 2 pizza teams. Anyone ever heard of the 2 pizza teams? A couple folks? Yeah. So the idea is we never want to have a team that can't be fed by 2 pizzas. So we like smaller teams, teams that control the products, teams that build the products and get them out the door quickly and can iterate them on them fast. And so one reason we see people going to DevOps is they want to emulate that and be able to get more services out the door quicker. Much like donuts, right? So I think the other part of DevOps is, you want it almost to be a little bit like an assembly line, right? Like you want the same size donuts every time you get software out the door, right? You don't want a giant donut, you want like little tiny donuts, right? And so DevOps is sort of making it a very repeatable mechanism so you can get that out the door. And I just like the donut slide, but it is definitely worth noting that, yeah, I mean, that's what you want. Maybe sometimes you want sprinkles on them or like a Halloween one, but again, you would generally want to know that you're making the same size donuts every time you're getting it out. Sweet. So some DevOps practices. So you see this, this is continuous integration, then continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. So this is the idea that when your developers or somebody hits commit, right, on their software and it goes into your repo, something happens, right? That's always gratifying. I think generally software developers like to see their code make it down the line. They like to see it maybe just end up in one spot, right? So continuous integration, delivery, and deployment means that it's getting out to different stages in your environment. It may not make it all the way to production, which is continuous deployment, but it may make it to a pre-prod or a beta environment where you can then take a look at it and maybe there's a little gate and you can get someone to approve it and then boom, you can get it out to production very quickly. So that's an important part of making sure that once somebody hits commit on their code, something happens, and that's always very gratifying to see. Infrastructure as code. This actually tends to be what I think a lot of people traditionally, when DevOps gets bandied about, is what we talk about, right? We talk about things like Chef and Puppet and Ansible and sort of infrastructure as code, right? The ability to kind of scale up and scale down, and you don't want to push buttons, you want to write code to do things. And those are important, but I think that's just one piece of the DevOps story, is treating your infrastructure as code. This here is a CloudFormation template. Anyone use CloudFormation? Sweet. CloudFormation is awesome. It's one of my favorite things. I left AWS for a little while, had a little sabbatical. I went to work for an ed tech startup in the Bay Area called StudyBlue. And one of the first things I did was I built dev environments that were one-click deploys, so that the developers, when we hired them, simply clicked on a wiki, clicked on a link, launched a CloudFormation template with all the stuff that I wanted. It created the right security groups for them. It created the right instances, the sizes that I wanted to have run, not the sizes they wanted to run, which can definitely be two different things. And set up all the things that I wanted them to have, built an environment for them. In about 20 minutes, they could have one. The other cool part is they could shut it down or kill it off and make a new one if they broke it. So it's very cool to be able to treat your infrastructure, again, like a piece of code. The other awesome part about treating it like code is you can put it in version control. So you can see when people do things. So if somebody changes a firewall rule, or if somebody changes the size of an instance, or if somebody updates any number of different variables, you can definitely go in and see when that was made, and then you can track it. And a lot of people actually do continuous integration and deployment with their infrastructure, so they can track the changes in their infrastructure as well. Monitoring and logging. So again, this was something that's very key and that we is also super important when you're doing DevOps, is making sure that you have the right monitoring tools. And it also goes into the cattle, not pets, right? If your instances are truly ephemeral, if you're using Docker containers that are going to go up and down, you're going to redeploy all the time, it's important to capture those logs in a centralized location. It's important to have centralized monitoring so people can go and look at that information in a meaningful way. It does you no good if one of the application servers is dying and then your auto-scaling group kills it off and it disappears for life and you never know what happened to it, right? And so if you want to go back through that, it is super important that you have good monitoring and logging set up. We have monitoring logging. There's a lot of great third-party tools out there. We see a lot of people doing elk stacks and using Sumo, and the really rich people will use Splunk. There's some really, really cool tools out there that you can go and play with to make this happen, from like Datadog and New Relic and all those out there. So good centralized monitoring, I think, is key to having this work well. And then you can understand the real-time performance of your application as well. Sweet. So just sort of benefits, right? So improved collaboration, right? Dev and operations are talking together, they're making decisions together. It's easier for you to get code out the door. Again, rapid delivery, you're getting code out the door, you're getting the features fixed or implemented, getting bugs fixed, you're getting that new piece of software out the door faster. We had someone mention Werner Vogel's. He has a great thing that he always talks about called fail fast, right? So that if you can go and build a piece of software and know that it's not working, well, at least you tried, right? And now you realize, hey, it doesn't work, then you can shelve it and move on to the next project, right? But you never know, that project may also be amazing. And then it got more adoption than you thought, and you can roll it right into production. So it's important to rapidly iterate on that. AWS, we do that crazy. I don't know how many services we have. It's like 100 now. And for those of you that are going or will watch reInvent, we'll probably launch, I don't know how many new services then, but a number. Reliability. So hopefully that goes up as well. So the ability to get this out the door and fix faster. You can make your application more reliable. Security is actually pretty cool. So treating DevOps or your infrastructure as code also means that you can build security into it, right? So you know that the web server is locked down and only allows a certain number of ports because you put it into the infrastructure code that built the web servers and the firewalls. And so you can actually build that into it as part of the practice, and you don't just have to have it be a second thought later on where you're like, oh crap, we should probably not leave this whole instance open to the world, right? You know that you can do it beforehand. Scale, so you can scale up, scale down, and then speed, which is, I don't know why it's the same as, I don't know, I guess we needed 6 things, but it's pretty close to the same as rapid delivery. But again, speed, getting things out quickly. Cool. So we're just going to take a quick look at some of the stuff that Amazon did. We really like this slide a lot. The monolithic architecture. So in 2001, it was a giant app. Does anyone know what the original Amazon.com was written in?
What it was written in?
Perl.
Was it really?
Sweet Perl. Wow. Yep, I don't know, good stuff, right? And it was big, right? So it had everything in it, like the kit and caboodle, right? So it was one app, it had the shopping cart and the taxes and the listing and user authentication, and like everything was in one app. And to get this out the door, as we were growing, you can imagine was a little painful, right? So, we'd have code freezes, and then, 20 operations guys would sit in a room at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they'd roll this out to the fleet and just pray it all worked, right? Just with the handwritten scripts doing everything. And, God forbid they had to roll back, right? But, that's sort of how it was, and it really wasn't working that well. So, as the store grew, add more and more features came online, it really wasn't working all that well. And it really took about 8 years for Amazon to move from this monolithic architecture to service-oriented architecture, where we had smaller teams, everything's API-based. So for those of you that are used to AWS, every AWS service has an API. So you're probably seeing like EC2, dash Amazon AWS, and then we'll have a regional endpoint for US East and US West. And so you use those endpoints, but believe it or not, those are also the endpoints that our internal services use, right? So those, for anybody that has to launch an EC2 instance or use DynamoDB or S3, S3 gets used a lot, they use the same endpoints. And so for Amazon.com at the time, they did very much the same thing. So now everything was its own endpoint. So if you needed to calculate the taxes for a given state, you would call the tax API. If you wanted to calculate shipping, you'd call the shipping API. And I forget what it is nowadays, but if you go to Amazon.com, it's something crazy like over 100 APIs that you hit just to display the final web page that you get rendered when you go to the home page. Because every single thing's a different API. And so each one of those teams, again, is run by these small two-pizza teams, and that's how they ended up building all these services to be able to scale this giant organization. Sweet. So this was good, right? So yay, we like this. It was awesome, but they kind of did feel that they could improve. And so they did a couple of surveys to find out where maybe things weren't working so well, where they might have inefficiencies, where there might still be gaps in this process. And essentially, they found out at this time that we're just waiting around. So even though they had this great service-oriented architecture, they still had manual people getting the software out the door, right? So somebody would commit some code, and they'd still have to wait around for someone to build it, and maybe someone to put it on the beta environment, and then someone to put it into pre-prod. And so essentially, they would just wait, for hours. Sometimes they'd wait for days. Sorry. And so what they wanted to do is they really wanted to cut down on this waiting, and this was not a good thing for getting the software out the door quickly. And so we basically built a tool called Pipelines. We'll talk a little bit about it. We actually rolled it out as a service called AWS Code Pipelines, but we use it internally. It's a visual tool that we have that allows for developers to deploy once they hit that commit button and decide where that software is going to go down the line. And what we found was the developments were faster, it was safer, we were able to automate more, have less manual intervention, simplification, and one of the key points was visualizing it, right? So everyone really liked the idea that you could see it as it goes from each different stage down the line. Making it visual was also a very important piece for getting this rolled out and getting adoption inside of Amazon. So we have thousands of teams across Amazon. This was 2014, so not super recently. We're always sometimes a little bit behind on our numbers. But we are building microservices, many environments, and essentially in 2014 they did 50 million deploys, which I think was about 2 deploys a second, which is pretty awesome across all of Amazon to deploy that often. And so pipelines was the key thing in letting us make that happen and getting more deploys out the door. And then one of the other interesting things that came about after deploying pipelines was that they found that productivity and just general happiness around the development teams was higher. And so the ability for developers to see their code get out the door actually improved just their general well-being, right? So if you don't have to commit code and then cut a ticket or send someone an email and wait for them to maybe put it on a server when they feel like it, and then you can actually see it get out the door and get onto a server when you want, it just makes your life a lot happier. And so we run these surveys every year, and this was just one of the interesting things that we found after releasing the pipeline service. All right. So where can you start? So just want to go over a couple of the tools that we have available at AWS, for helping, with DevOps. So does anyone use any of our code tools? Anybody?
We have started looking at it, but we've not yet figured out the code pipeline.
Not yet. That's cool. And I think one of the interesting things is like it doesn't have to be our tools, right? And I think there's a cultural shift here. These are tools. I think they're great. There's definitely some that I would have used had they been available when I worked at the startup, but they weren't. So we had some other tools
Does
that
it
did
play well
something
with
else.
TFS?
What's that?
Does it play well with Microsoft's TFS Visual Studio Online or not really?
So I mean, anything that can connect to the AWS API, it should work well with. If there's an SDK, we have a .NET SDK, so it should work pretty well.
Yeah, your tools just use Git as a source control too, so if you need it.
Yeah, TFS
Yeah.
works.
But fundamentally we had our issue was with tools with the identity access.
Identity and access.
Yeah, because we already have identities for all our employees.
Sure.
And I think the tools only work with the AWS IAM service at the time.
And you can't federate?
We couldn't, when we looked at this a year or so ago, it wasn't an
Okay.
option, yeah.
Okay.
That's the only thing that kept us from really.
All right. Yeah, I was hoping, or I was under the impression that you, much like everything else, you should be able to federate, but maybe there's some IAM underlying roles that wouldn't allow you to do that, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
a year ago
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not now.
So we just have 4, code pipeline, deploy, commit, and code build. I do have a slide on each one, so we can just sort of talk about it. So pipeline, this is really, what do you want to have happen when you hit commit, right? So what do you want to have go down? So basically your source, you can go to a build stage, staging, production. You can follow that all the way down the line. It's a very visual tool, it's pretty cool. We have a couple of fun things. There's actually a approver. So if you want to have someone approve, it'll actually send them a notification and say, hey, there's a production release, can you go and approve it? And it'll actually make it out the door. You can see here, we can pull sources from code commit, which is our hosted Git, S3, GitHub. We have some builds with a bunch of builds. Our build tool called Code Build, Jenkins, Solano, TeamCity, test with a bunch of different ones. Ghost Inspector is pretty rad. I've played around with that quite a bit. It does some pretty neat integration. And then out to production, you can use Deploy, Elastic Beanstalk, OpsWorks, CloudFormation, and then Zevia Labs, which is another partner that we have. And so pipeline is sort of, hey, like I want all these stages for my software after I hit the commit button. Code deploy. Code deploy is actually one of the tools that I ended up sort of like halfway building myself before it was released when I worked at a startup. You want to get your code onto boxes typically or onto instances, and code deploy is a way to do that. We integrate with pipeline obviously, but really what it does is you put your code in, or your end artifact into an S3 bucket. You tell code deploy that it's there. There's actually a very nice simple YAML file called an AppSec file that tells you what to do with it. So you can stop services, you can run tests, you can run anything on the command line or in Windows, and then it runs. You can actually tell it how you want to roll it out. So you can tell it, hey, deploy one instance at a time, half at a time. You can just blow them all away. And so there's some very interesting ways that you can get software onto boxes. And really what I've found is it's a way to just make it so every deployment has a similar configuration file to get onto boxes, and you're not scripting something new for every type of deployment. I think it's pretty awesome. I also think that that's probably one of the reasons most people use Docker, right? So it's for that reason, and Docker's pretty awesome for that. You want one type of file to get out there. And, Docker also does it pretty well, but if you're looking for something to get it onto instances, I like Code Deploy. You can also use Code Deploy on-prem, which is sort of interesting. So you can put it on your boxes in your data center or colo. Code build, this is pretty straightforward. It's a tool to build software. It is actually runs with Docker, so you can give it your own Docker container. We also have some pre-made ones for things like Java, Python, Go. I think we have an Android one. And really it's just, hey, you got to build your software somewhere, right? And so really what we'll do is we'll spin up an environment for you, build it, and then shut it down. And you just only pay for it while you're doing the build, and then you don't have to, so you don't have to have a fleet of build servers just hanging around. So it's really meant to build software. Oh, it's pretty self-explanatory. Code commit, this is our hosted GitHub, or not GitHub, hosted Git. GitHub's totally different. They're like the Facebook of code. And so really, it's a way for you to, if you have Git, anyone not use Git, actually, is probably a better question. Anyone not using Git?
I
No?
don't not use.
CVS? No? Nothing? Subversion? No one's hanging on? Okay.
It's all good.
Yeah, so Git. So it's just if you need hosted Git, it actually sits on top of S3. We use S3 and Dynamo for it. A couple cool things about it is, much like S3, it sort of scales infinitely, so you can have as much data on it as you want. You can also use large files, which is sort of weird for Git, so if you need to have like a giant, I don't know, RPM or ISO or something crazy, you can actually put a whole giant file in there, and that works pretty good. It's also encrypted, so everything's encrypted at rest and over the wire. So it's very cool. I do recommend if you have a need to have Git and you don't want to host it yourself, it's definitely worth checking out. And that was kind of everything. I didn't want to overdo it. I know it's really more of a conceptual one. I'd love it if you guys have questions about any of the code stuff or DevOps in general. We're all a very talkative bunch.
The code build is, so a lot of the technologies you guys are running is some mainstream technologies you've kind of rebranded to a point, right? I mean, so like MySQL's under the covers for the same technology as some of your database products, right?
Yes, so we have some database products, right, that we call out. RDS runs MySQL, Aurora is MySQL compatible, but clearly we're running, and Postgres now as well.
So code build, is that your own thing, or is it Jenkins under there, or what's?
I don't know. I don't know. It's probably our own thing. It runs Docker, so we have pre-made Docker containers. You can also build your own Docker container if you have a custom software build. So we have a Docker container orchestration tool called ECS for putting Docker onto EC2 instances. I would imagine we like to use our own stuff. I couldn't say, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say we're probably using our own software for that. Yeah.
I didn't see
No.
I didn't see a box called code review on any of those slides. How does that work?
We don't have a code review. We do have one called Code Star, but it's a little bit more of a dashboard for your teams and sort of tracks the metrics on builds rather than actually have like a review. So we don't actually have something where you can go in and review. And I think a lot of organizations kind of have their own flavor of what they've built out for that. CodeStar does integrate with Jira, sorry, and so you can do your sprints and stuff. But I think it's probably up to however you want to do it. We might be in there one day, but I don't know. It's a good one. That'd be a good feature though. Yeah.
You don't have a service that's like an answer to Jira, like AWS.
No, we don't. Yeah, we don't have an answer to Jira.
Well,
No.
I was thinking,
Yes.
GitHub has the pull request and like an integrated code review.
Yeah, and so you could build it, right? I mean, so it's pretty basic. So you could write anything that you could write on top of any managed Git, and then you'd be able to you can see all the requests come in, so you could build something. But we don't have something pre-made.
I have a question for you. I was in one of your user groups for AWS.
Okay.
And in my primary job is reporting, and we use Tableau.
Okay,
so
yeah.
it's basically you get the data, put it in S3, shape it, and ingest it into Redshift or Snowflake.
Yep.
So my question to you also is, as DevOps is, right, I'm not interested in the plumbing.
Sure.
Okay? I want, like, from my data to my insight, I want to be able to do it in under half hour. Okay? So, like today, if I have to do that, if I have to do Kinesis, I need half hour. I have to be a Kinesis expert, I need to be a network security group expert, and the whole shebang there.
Sure.
Why don't you make our life easy?
Sure. So the question is, so you run basically analytics tool with Tableau, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the very common ways that people use it is S3 is generally like your data lake, as we call it, right? You typically ingest, put things on S3, and then you can take them down the lines to different places, and they eventually end up in Redshift, right? And so the question is why don't we have a tool that makes that easier for you essentially? So we have one that we just launched called Glue. Have you taken a look at that? It doesn't work with Kinesis though, which is why.
It's still, Glue is firstly it's very expensive, and secondly, compared, like Google just launched one called Google Cloud Data Prep. What they have done is, I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of a company called Trifactor. So you can take any file and just graphically, natural language or structured, make all your joins and shaping, and it only cost me like 10 cents an hour, and then once I'm ready for deployment in production, it's only like 50 cents an hour, whereas Glue is more like 25 bucks an hour.
I mean, I think we're iterating on things, right? So, I mean, we understand, and getting your feedback on what you're looking for is super important to us, right? And so, all of the stuff that we built, and put together are based on the feedback requests. Like 90% of the features that AWS makes are from direct feedback, right? And so, all I can say is, keep providing us with what you would like to see out there, and they'll, potentially, like, we could have teams that are building it, right? There are partners, like, we have partners like Informatica. There's a bunch of other ETL partners that we work with that might have something that sits on top of AWS that makes it easier for you, but that would be sort of my best recommendation that we'd have right now. So,
for the folks viewing at home, the path. So you've got DevOps in the middle, you've got Dev on one side, and you've got Ops on the other side.
Yeah.
The path to go from Dev to DevOps seems very clear. What would you recommend for the people that are on the Ops side that are trying to bend towards DevOps?
Yeah. So I think the Ops side. I think there definitely is a transformation there, and actually I probably didn't dive into it enough as I could have. So it's definitely a little bit different in that I think the cool thing about being on the ops side, and that's something that I did for a while, is that instead of sort of you can spend your time actually building much larger ecosystem of things, right? So you can spend a little bit more time creating templates that are going to grow. You can spend a little bit more time integrating security into how the environments get rolled out. You can spend a little bit more time creating self-service tools that your developers are going to use to get it out there. So it is a little bit of a different shift, but you're essentially going to, there's a little bit of a shift towards like, hey, how do I automate this, or how do I do things at scale? And you're still probably going to have times where you're going to have to go in and tweak the OS or tweak the kernel, but then you're going to look at it and say, hey, how do I make this happen, at scale, or if I'm not around, or how do I make this happen independently? Like if this server goes away, how do I write my code in a way, or how do I write my environment in a way where I don't really care? I'll get a notification of it later, but it just replaces itself automatically. And so that's the shift that I generally see the operations team go through. And it can be, it can be a little tougher, right? Because they're used to having, kind of physical boxes that they manage, and now they're managing something that's a little bit more like this weird cloud, jellyfish thing, right? And so, but I think, at the end of the day, you're helping the software get out the door faster, and you're helping your product grow, and you're helping iterate and create new products that may bring, more and more money. So it is a little bit of and more delight to your customers, right? And so, that's also important. So I think the cool part is in general, switching to DevOps lets your company focus more on the business that they're good at, and less on like, hey, here's like this crazy IT beast that we all have to wrangle in.
Does AWS, you guys use these tools yourself? The services use these tools? Like, are you all using code commit through source control, or can you use whatever you like?
Yeah, they can use whatever they like in general. You know, there are obviously, you know, to get your code out to production, there's a bunch of things that you have to do. But you know, pipelines was made internally for AWS to use, and then we just productized it to get it out to our customers because we thought it was great. You know, we have some of our older code tools that have been around a little while, but in general, you know, we try to use the AWS tools that are available as well.
I was curious. I was in an Oracle world for a while. I'm trying to transition my career into AWS and probably into a DevOps type role since I was a system administrator for e-business suite. I'm trying to kind of get caught in the catch-22 of, you know, people want you if you have experience, but you can't get experience, you can't get that first leg up. And is there any kind of not a typical path, I'm sure there isn't one, but is there a...
Yeah, I mean, so it's a question, right? So, you know, kind of, you know, switching, like how do you make the switch from, being, you know, a sysadmin before and moving into the cloud world. So, you know, a couple of not easy wins, but a couple of typical things that we see people do. The certifications do go a long way. You know, we see a lot of people who get, you know, just the AWS associate certification. The professional one, it's pretty tough. But it's definitely, they're redoing it right now, so it should have a new iteration. But you know, we see a lot of people that have that. I know as a hiring person, that's something that if I saw it on a resume, I was definitely like, oh, all right, this person, you know, went out and got certified, and you know, I'd be more likely to push them through. You know, as well as, you know, can you know, maybe do like a smaller like bootstrap or help somebody out, get something up there so you can get like your chops, you know, kind of built up and, you know, do some of those best practices.
kind of build maybe a little portfolio with your
you can totally build
free tier stuff.
A little free tier stuff, or you know, help get that blog up. There's some really cool tools out there like S3, which is our simple storage service, has a really cool feature to make a website. So there's some cool tools that help you make like just a static website, so you can sort of commit it to Git and then, you know, have it build and then up to S3, and you know, there's some interesting projects that we've seen people do like that. So, but we often, you know, I mean, oddly enough, like the sysadmin role doesn't always disappear, right? You know, there's always going to be I/O problems, and there's always going to be, you know, kernel panics, and there's always like for better or for worse, it still runs on Linux, right? And so, for as much as like, hey, you know, we want to treat all these things like code, you know, there's still going to be the time where you know, you switch an instance type, or you go from Ubuntu to Red Hat, and everything goes down the tubes, and you definitely still need to have those skills to be able to go in and troubleshoot it so that you can automate it later. So those, you know, I've seen people recompile their kernels on EC2. I don't recommend doing it, but you can do it. I did it once, it worked. I never did it again successfully. I don't know what happened. Should have bought a lottery ticket that day, but yeah. So there are still a lot of those tools. I mean, you know, everything. There's still storage and networking to look at, and you know, some of our enhanced networking features and some other features to use like GPUs. You still got to get on the OS. Sweet.
So I vaguely remember a year ago, I think AWS bought a web-based ID company, Cloud9, was it?
Yes,
yeah, Cloud9, yep.
Did anything ever come of that? Is it just still running on its own?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's cool. I've played with it one time. It's really neat, but I don't know if we've.
So,
I have not seen much.
I would expect it to be in the suite of services by now, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's above my level.
So what exactly is your role in AWS?
What's my role at AWS? Yeah, so the solutions architects work with customers to help them deploy their application or migrate applications, or build new applications on AWS in the best way possible.
So one of those scams typically approach you and then you bid for professional services? That's how
yeah, so solutions architects, like our solutions, we're a free service. So we work with our account manager counterparts, and so we'll come and work with you. You know, so I have there's SAs that work with some of the guys at Liberty. I have a couple SAs that work with like iRobot. You know, I was an SA, I used to work with Pinterest and I worked with Airbnb, and really like we're there, so I can't, you know, I think one of the differences, we don't actually put our hands on keyboard and code for them. That's where we want partners or professional services to come in. But what we're there to do is to, you know, you come to us and say, hey, I want to build, you know, this app that, you know, streams data from Kinesis to S3 and then to Redshift, and we can say, well, here's why, here's how you might want to approach that, you know, here's some of the concerns, here's some of the ways that we see other customers do it, and so we really are, you know, the technical facing portion of AWS for a lot of customers. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
One last question. Did I recall this correctly that I read you could deploy like a mobile app out to across many devices?
Yeah, testing. It's called mobile
Yeah.
testing.
Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one I'm not sure. I'd have to look. I don't know if we have that one. We have App Stream, which is an interesting one that allows you to sort of take an app and sort of deploy it to anything. It's almost like a VDI, but just for the app, which is really interesting. It's actually a pretty cool app. I'll be honest, sometimes that's one of the challenges of AWS is that we have so many services that you know, I often have a little bit of a hard time keeping up with everything that we announce. So we could definitely have an awesome mobile app that you can deploy like that, but I wouldn't want to speak to something that I'm not super deep in. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you had an idea potentially of how many companies, like percentage-wise, have DevOps people in-house, or how many hire services to perform that?
Yeah, I don't have a number. You know, I think the challenge is, you know, DevOps resources tend to, especially experienced ones, tend to be a little tough to find, right? And I think most companies would like to have DevOps people in-house. You know, a lot of times we see customers come in and they'll start to use like professional services or a partner with the idea that they're going to train up and migrate that over to their staff eventually. And getting DevOps engineers in-house is definitely part of that transformation.
Maybe a company size type of.
Yeah, I mean, I see it with, I mean, it's, you know, you don't always know, like, I think that, you know, we've seen people want to get DevOps from all different size companies, you know, from 1 or 2 person size companies, all the way up to, you know, big giant enterprise companies. So, yeah, it's a good skill to have these days.
Do you see many differences between like a DevOps developer and a full stack developer?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
I'm trying to think.
Yeah, so I think the DevOps developer, or what we call sort of a DevOps person, right, generally are the new operations people, right? So they tend to write the infrastructure as code. They tend to be responsible for, you know, auto scaling. They tend to be responsible for creating the pipelines, creating monitoring, you know, all of that stuff, creating all the security profiles. Whereas the full stack developer tends to be the person that's creating the application on top of the infrastructure that the DevOps person's created. At least that's what I've traditionally seen. You know, sometimes those lines get blurred. I worked with, you know, I was the DevOps guy for a company, and then we had a full stack developer, and, you know, I generally, like, I don't even know. Sometimes I don't always know what the full stack developer does or means, but, or if there are really those people that do that. You know, I generally find that you have people that are good with databases, you have people that are good at writing code, and, you know, I have yet to see someone that's like the master of every single thing. So, but that's generally what I see. You know, the developers write the code that sit on top of the infrastructure the DevOps, you know, people would be.
Yeah, I guess when you say that DevOps developer, for me in my vernacular, that's like a platform developer.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I think, that's one of the interesting things culturally about DevOps, right? Is like every organization can interpret it sort of differently, right? And that's why it's important to, kind of foster what you want to get out of going to DevOps, right? Like what does it mean to your company to say, I can get this product out in, 3 months instead of 12 months or 16 months or 18 months. If I can fix a bug in a day rather than 3 weeks, right? And so I think that's what it's asking you is like, and what transformation do I have to make organizationally to make that happen, right? Because that's what a lot of people are doing, and as you guys know, the first slide was, software moves fast, right? And if you're not also moving fast, then, potentially you're either losing customers or, you're giving away that business to somebody else.
I think the trend is actually going even one step further. This is, I don't even care whether it's software or something, it's like electricity. I turn it on,
Yeah.
I use it, you do all the patching, you do all your, whatever you need to do, you just make sure.
Yeah, I didn't even dive into serverless, which is a whole other topic of DevOps and serverless that I could talk for, 45 minutes on. We saw containers, and I think you're right. Eventually you'll just sort of write some code and sort of plop it in something and say, I just want you to deal with the scaling, security, and all this other stuff,
Yeah.
and I just wrote the code. So you're absolutely right.
Like
Yeah.
GitLab and Heroku.
No, actually, like for example, for Lambda, right? You can go on to YouTube and see Berkeley has an AmpLab channel, and what they said is not everybody is a CS major. Okay, so trying to set up all the Hadoop and Pig and all that stack is a lot of work. Whereas we have AWS Lambda, which is a teraflop computing power, which costs very little money. And so what they did was they wrote a library called Pyren. So what it does is you write your function, and all you need to do is map and a function, and it goes and invokes that in parallel on AWS Lambda. So previously you don't have to spin up any Hadoop, Spark and all that EMR and all that stuff. You just write your code. Once your algorithm is working fine for one iteration, if you want to parallelize it and scale it, just call that function and you're all set to go.
Yeah, Lambda's pretty crazy. Yep. It's gonna, we'll all be replaced by Lambdas at some point. Sweet.
All right, I'm going to wrap up the video. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.